Well, congratulations to everybody for comprising a critical mass.
We're so delighted. Thank you all for being here today, joining us for today's BU Alumni Career Webinar. What is employee engagement and why that matters in your career? My name is Jeff Murphy. I'm a member of the Alumni Career Engagement Team in the Office of Alumni Relations. Today's webinar is offered to our 366,000 BU alumni around the globe, and of course, all of our current students. Throughout your career, BU is committed to helping you define and achieve your professional goals. And we aim to do this by providing everyone with access to a series of valuable online tools and social media communities. Again, I know we've got some folks joining us from some very far away places and also, of course, right on campus. But I want everybody to know how much we really do value your participation in this and every program that we offer. Before we dive in, just a couple of housekeeping notes from me. Today's presentation is being recorded and will soon be made available for on-demand viewing on the BU Alumni and Friends website, which you can find at www.bu.edu/alumni. Our speaker today is, as always, very eager to answer your questions, and you're welcome to submit them throughout the presentation using the Q&A box. Again, similar to the chat, just click on Q&A, go ahead, type your question in, and we will make sure we save some time at the end to get through all of those. You are, of course, welcome to use the chat. I'll keep an eye on that as well. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day, BU College of Arts and Sciences alum, Scott Singer. Scott is founder and president of Insider Career Strategies, LLC. As a certified career coach and resume writer, Scott guides individual and corporate clients through today's increasingly complex job search and hiring process and helps develop the resumes, LinkedIn profiles, and other tools and skills that help individuals at all stages of their career manage their professional image. Scott brought his knowledge, expertise, and talents to national and international companies in a diverse range of industries, including major corporations such as Motorola, Ryder, Bacardi, Burger King, and LVMH. Scott holds his bachelor's degree from BU and also an MBA from the University of Michigan, Dearborn. Scott's also a certified professional career coach and a certified professional resume writer. He is also the board chair of a diversified social services agency. He's a member of the Forbes Coaches Council. And as you can tell by his tie, an incredibly devoted BU alum who has shared his talents and expertise with literally thousands of Boston University alumni and students over the last many years. Scott, as always, I'm just thrilled to have you joining us. Why don't we go ahead? You can get your slide deck up on the screen for everyone to see, and we'll be off and running.
We good?
Looks great. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, Jeff. As always, we've been working together for about 6-7 years at this point. It's been great. So happy to do this. So let's talk a little bit about what is employee engagement and why it matters in your career. And this is a term that I'm sure you're hearing a lot in the news these days. You know, I'm going to get into the details about what engagement is and why this is important. I do want to accentuate something that Jeff said. Questions are absolutely welcome. Feel free to put them in the chat box, or we can address these towards the end. But we, certainly want to answer anything that you may have. So feel free. I know this is kind of a little bit of a nebulous topic in some ways too. So, it's a little different. So let's talk about it. What is employee engagement? So at its base, it's really an employee's commitment and their connection to an organization, right? This is about, how connected are you really with the place you are? So, this can be from a managerial standpoint, right? And this is, how managers and executives look at this. It can be a driver of talent acquisition and retention. It's a fancy way of saying recruiting and keeping people. Customer loyalty. I don't know if you've ever been to a restaurant and you've gone and the restaurant, person that's serving you gives you attitude. They're not happy to be there. How much do you want to come back? Loyalty is impacted by employees' engagement. The organizational performance, people that are engaged tend to perform more. Shareholder value in the sense that if you're more productive, the company can make more. And of course, by extension, cost savings, because people who are engaged are going to be more motivated to take on work. And it's really a direct reflection on productivity. So as I mentioned, it's really about connection. And this is about being focused, being involved, having a positive attitude about where you're working, a team orientation. And, I know this is kind of a buzzword. Everyone uses the phrase teams these days, but teams matter. And, sometimes a team can be something that's structured. It can be, hey, I'm part of the marketing team, but it can also be cross-functional teams where you're working across disciplines, but your willingness to work with others within the organization. But also the other piece of this is satisfaction. How much are you getting out of being at work every day? Whether it's working remotely from your computer at home or going into the office. And the way that companies measure this is they usually do company surveys. And, companies will come in, they will do a massive survey of everybody in the company, and they'll parse the results, break it down in terms of the different factors. But I want to point out one very important thing. Employee engagement is not the same thing as happiness. A lot of people tend to equate, oh, I've got to be happy at work. Let me praise that a little differently. I mean, I enjoy my work and I get a lot out of it. And I feel fulfilled in what I do in terms of working with my clients, but I'm not sure that I would describe my personal state as happiness every day. It's, happiness is something that's more of, kind of a fleeting state, and it's something that happens from time to time. And, truthfully, I'm happiest when I'm with my family and I'm with my friends and, doing things I particularly enjoy. But, that doesn't mean that I can't be engaged at work and get something meaningful out of it. So I want to make sure that everyone understands there's a little bit of a distinction there. Doesn't mean that being happy at work is a bad thing. If you are, more power to you. And by the way, you'll see there, I have some references in terms of the source material. If anybody wants the presentation afterwards, Jeff can certainly share this with you. All right, so let's talk about what actually drives employee engagement. And first and foremost, there's organizational drivers. And drivers is a way of saying motivators. So first of all, career growth and development. If you feel like you're in a dead-end job and you're not going to be able to go anywhere from where you are, that's probably not going to make you terribly satisfied with where you are. Future outlook. What does it look like in the future? Do I feel like if I work hard and I contribute, I'll be able to get promoted and rewarded appropriately? Feeling valued. You may contribute millions of dollars to the company's top or bottom line annually, but if your manager treats you like garbage and you don't really feel like they really appreciate the fact of what you're doing, you're not going to feel engaged. There's managerial effectiveness. So, managers have a very important role in this, and more managers are being held accountable towards their team's engagement. And part of it is making sure that everybody has their clear goals and accountability. What are your marching orders? What are you supposed to be doing every day? Also, that people's opinions count at work. If you're going to go ahead and you're going to go to work, is it more of like a military style command and control where they're telling you, here's the job, you're going to do it and you're going to eat them and smile? Or is it the kind of thing where you have some real say in terms of how things are shaped and what you see in terms of opportunities and ways that the company operates could be improved? And of course, making sure that your contributions to the organizational success will be recognized and that you have the ability to go ahead and, make sure that you're going to get, as a manager, that you're going to take care of your people. And then, of course, it kind of goes without saying, but it's important, which is that employers that do care about engagement, they invest in culture. Now, culture is a really loaded word, and I want to define what that means here. When you're talking about a company culture, we're talking about the way that people feel that the company is oriented. Is it the kind of place that values the fact that it's forward looking? Is it someplace that has a certain feel about how they treat employment? Do they treat people with a certain level of dignity and respect? Culture is a very difficult thing, and sometimes measuring it differently can also mean that the ways that companies operate. So I'll give you an example. One of the big employers that everybody who comes out of the business school wants to work for is Goldman Sachs, right? I'm sure you hear that all the time. And, Goldman Sachs hard driving culture. They want people in the office. They want people that are really motivated, people that are not afraid to work extra hours on a regular basis to get things done. That's just the culture at Goldman Sachs. But you might have some places that, for example, might be a Silicon Valley company. And when you're looking at people that work in a culture like that, maybe they value more flexibility, having foosball tables in the break room, different food and, beverage rewards for the employees. It really depends. It's all about building the culture from the top down and making sure that people feel like they belong within the environment. So how does this matter to you? Here you are, you're thinking about your job search, you're looking at everything that's going on. How do you find companies that value engagement as an organization? And there are a lot of publicly available clues that can help you with this. So the first thing is that they walk the talk about people. And when I say people, I mean the people that do the day-to-day work, right? These are the folks that, are constituents within the organization, employees, managers, staff. So they focus on having fulfilling jobs, meaning that everybody has a clear sense of where their role belongs within the success of the organization, but also that the jobs are enriched in such a way that there's going to be some sort of level of satisfaction they get from this. And by the way, I want to make very clear also, not every job, even at the highest engagement companies, is going to be 100% fulfilling. It's just not, it's not feasible. But what you're talking about is the overall trend. Now, the next thing is performance and talent management. And what I mean here is, what is the system that the company uses to evaluate their people, to make sure that people are rewarded on a regular basis for the contributions that they do? How do they identify the people that are going to get promoted? How do they make sure that people's performance management works on a regular basis? So, companies that tend to value engagement tend to put more of a focus on this. They tend to have feedback loops in terms of making sure that employees know how they're doing, what's expected of them, and then measuring against that. There's a fine line, though, between making sure that people have clear feedback and using data to be tyrannical too. So, companies know how to balance that. Also, there's the candidate and employee experience, and these are two separate items, but I want to break these down. Candidate refers to somebody who's being considered for a job at the company, and we could have a whole different conversation, Jeff, about applicant tracking systems and the way that works. I'm less concerned about that. That's kind of, I just want to go on record and saying that the process for applying to jobs is pretty broken right now, but that's another story. But when you start getting in there, when you start getting into the interviews, do they treat you with dignity and respect? Is it the kind of thing that they make clear that they want to listen to you? They want to get to know you. They want to make sure that there's a cultural fit, but also that carries over to the employee experience. So once you go ahead, you get that offer, you come on board, making sure that that whole job seeking phase wasn't just selling you a bill of goods, making sure that once you get in there, that the employee experience is a positive as well, that they're, again, walking the talk. It's not just telling you how it is, but showing you how it is. Training and development, if they invest in making sure that you are getting constant training. And by the way, a lot of companies are afraid to invest in training. And the reason that they're afraid to do so is they're afraid that their employees will learn what they learn and then walk across the street to their competitor and, and take what they learn there, which is a very short-sighted perspective. So, companies that tend to invest in training and development, and not necessarily just things that are technical skills on your day-to-day job, maybe things like managerial skills, interpersonal skills. If you're interested in going back and getting a degree, a master's degree, an MBA, maybe they help you with that. But the training and development piece is very important. Then, of course, compensation. If you go ahead and you have a conversation with your leadership and they expect certain things and you meet or exceed that, they're going to reward you appropriately. So all of these different pieces kind of fit together. Now, the next part is that they actually care about what their image is as an employer of choice. Now, employer of choice means that if you're just talking about basic economics, right? You know, the employers are selling jobs, so to speak, and you as a as a candidate are buying into that job and that company. And there's a lot of employers out there, especially when you get into big cities. So being an employer of choice where people actually seek you out is something that is very important. And by the way, there's a reason why everybody wants to go work for the so-called FANG companies, you know, the tech companies, Facebook, Google. I know Facebook is called Meta now, but Facebook, Google, you know, the LinkedIn's of the world, these are Microsoft, these are all companies that they invest deeply in making sure that people want to go there, because if they're going to continue to be innovative, they need the best employees. So things like, bless you, Jeff. So other things like, for example, you know, they care about the best companies lists. And we can talk a little bit more about how that works. By the way, just so that you know, best companies lists are not something that happen by random. It's not like Forbes or Fortune will look around and say, oh, wow, that looks like a really great place to work. Companies invest a lot of money to be on these lists, because they have to hire staff that are going to be dedicated to managing the application process, as well as making sure that the employees, what will happen is that the people that give out the commendations on these lists will survey the applicants, the employees of the applicant companies. So they're going to validate what is there on those lists as well. Online review sites. Now, I'm going to give this with a little grain of salt. Like, for example, the big one is Glassdoor, which is also a job board. And I know a lot of people rely on Glassdoor for their reviews to get some insights on an employer. I'm not saying that this is an absolute, but you want to get a general sense. And the reason that Glassdoor is not always the most reliable for this is that it's self-nominated. It's not like they go ahead and they consolidate scores from a variety of engagement surveys from companies. These are people that self-nominate, put up their own reviews on a company. And generally places that, you know, people that are really, really happy and want to evangelize their company are going to put up a review. People that are very unhappy with a company are going to put up their review as well. It's that bulk in the middle that don't really put in anything, but you can get a sense, generally speaking, of what some of the trends are. Another piece of this is employee branding. And what that means is that companies will invest marketing into what is it like to work at company X. So, you know, an example that I'm going to give is Apple. Apple works really hard on their branding to make sure that people know that the people that they're hiring are innovators and creative and customer focused. And they have entire websites dedicated just to selling who they are as a company and where you come in as a candidate. So it's important to keep in mind that if a company is investing in employee branding, they're at least thinking about it. And then, of course, there's media image. This is where opening the good old newspaper will tell you. If there's a company that's constantly in the news for all the wrong reasons, you know, they're being sued repeatedly by a variety of employees, or if there's things that are getting into the media because they're doing things that are standing out as an employer of choice, these things matter, and companies are very sensitive to this. Now, when you actually get in with somebody and you have a conversation, you're going to have time where you can do an interview with them. And this is a chance for you to ask questions and try to learn more about what the company is like and how to find out what their stance on engagement is. I think you're going to find that more and more companies are very aware that employees and job seekers are more tuned into the idea of culture and engagement. So they're going to be prepared, hopefully, for those conversations. And what you want to look for is make sure that people are putting some priority on it. Part of it is using your emotional intelligence to kind of evaluate, is the person sitting across from you, when they're telling you what a wonderful company that they're working for, are they telling the truth? Do they feel like they're really committed to that? Do they feel like they're really selling that by giving examples and what it is that they think really makes it an engaged and strong culture? And you want to make sure that there's a nice, open, two-way discussion on this, which means that when you get into an interview and asking questions, can you tell me a little bit about the culture of the organization? Can you tell me about the culture of this department? What does it look like? What is it? What would my career here look like? Can you tell me a little bit about how people are rewarded? When you start digging beneath the surface, they're generally going to be a little more open to these conversations because they live the culture. They understand that. It's funny. I've worked at companies where people are interviewing and they just look miserable. They're thinking about, geez, I want to just get back to my desk and finish because otherwise the beatings will continue here. So, try to see if the interviews look like they actually want to be there interviewing you. If they feel like they're really present and they're engaged in the conversation, that's a good sign. I wouldn't necessarily rule it out if they feel like they're slightly distracted. There's a lot of things happening in a company and God knows what else is going on, but try to use that as a data point. But really, it's less about selling. The more that they put the hard sell on you, the more you're going to feel like they're really trying to just make sure that they close this job. Whereas the idea being that they're going to be more of a consultant. They're going to share with you, positives, negatives, warts and all. What do they see as the company? Here's what our strengths are. Here's what our weaknesses are, just as much as they're going to quiz you. So it's going to be more of a consultative type of a discussion. So, here we are, we're in today's ambiguous workplace, and, we've got everybody stuck between, the idea of, are we remote? Are we in person? I'm sure people have heard the term quiet quitting, people being less engaged at work. So you need to really use some intelligence in terms of navigating this situation in today's environment. So, it's important to know that how people work can be as important to an employer as the work itself. In other words, are they building the culture? You want to make sure that that's happening, driving results. And of course, other reasons. People have different motivations. What are the things that they bring to the table in terms of why they want to work and how they work? If it's very clear that somebody is simply there for the paycheck, and there are people like that, and there are companies like that. Let's be very clear. Not every place is a world-class employer. Everybody has their own motivation. Sometimes it's a positive reinforcement. Sometimes it's a negative reinforcement. You never know what the organization culture is going to be like, but you want to try to evaluate that. But this is something that I think a lot of people have lost some sight over the last couple of years, which are that companies do have the right to determine the parameters in which they want people to work. Okay, so what do you mean by that, Scott? Well, if there is you may have a desire to work remotely. You might say, hey, I did it during COVID and I can work remotely. Why shouldn't this company give me the chance to do it? Well, the truth of the matter is companies have their business models, they have their prerogatives. And, one of the prerogatives that they have is that they believe that the job needs to be done in person. I'm not saying you have to like it, but you have to understand that if it's not a flexible factor for them, that, hopefully they're going to, look at culture from different ideas. But, keep in mind that engagement is a two-way street also. You as an employee, you as a job seeker have a responsibility to, fulfill your end of the contract. And let's talk about what employment is at its most basic, right? They've got work, you've got skills, they pay you to bring those skills to work, and they're paying for a certain thing. And everything else beyond that is it's culture and engagement and other pieces beyond that, but that's really what it is. So, if you're going into this situation and that an organization is looking for, if they're looking for people that are going to work in person, partly or full time, and you go in there and you're just giving it your bare minimum, even though you've talked about it because you're upset that they weren't going to let you work remotely full time, that's more of a reflection on you than it is on the company. Companies have the rights to determine this. So you've got to make sure that, you're going to find a company whose culture is matching with that. And by the way, we can talk about this a little bit. I mean, there's ways to feel out if a company's willing to consider doing something remotely, but in the end, you're still responsible for your own behavior. And you do need to bridge the company's goals with your personal goals. So, here's what you want, here's what the company wants. All of that material in the middle is where you decide where you meet up. So, whether it's the compensation or where they feel about and land on remote work, what's it in terms of the reward and recognition, all these different factors that we had talked about, but you need to make a determination of what it is that you want. So when you get into an interview, does the job meet your personal aspirations? And here's what I mean. So let's say that you also get into an interview, you're career motivated, you want to move up and you want to be promoted, and they clearly tell you during the interview, this is not a promotional opportunity, this is a one-of-a-kind job, this is what it's going to be. If you take that job and it's not aligned with your goals, you're going to find yourself disappointed. And in that case, that's a question of your due diligence. Did you do the due diligence on that? That doesn't mean there aren't baits and switch, right? There are employers and some managers that will tell you, hey, this is great, you're going to come in, you're going to grow and develop, and you get in and it's a bill of goods. Hey, wait a second, there's nowhere to go with this. So, but you do need to do your due diligence. We talked about remote work, schedule flexibility, and of course, compensation. A lot of these things are hammered out before you even walk in the door that first day. Most of, not all of this. So, having those conversations, making sure that you're aligned. And by the way, if one of these factors doesn't match up with what you want and you accept the job, you've got to come to peace with that. That's something that's very important. And that doesn't mean you have to be happy about it, but it's something that is going to be a part of the question in terms of what's your role in building culture. And then, of course, workload. If there's companies that expect you to work 90 hours a week and you, under no circumstances, want to or able to do that, then taking a job where it's clearly illustrated that it's going to be that kind of environment, it's not going to be a good fit. So where does this fit in for you? Right? Here you are, you want to be engaged, you want to stay engaged with a company. So first and foremost, understand what your motivations are. We're all motivated by different things. To give an example, I am somebody who is, I'm very process oriented. I like the feeling of building things, getting things done, and then moving on to the next item, right? Some people are more focused on, and I know people like this, they just want the money. And that's okay. If you know yourself and, compensation above all, particularly some people in sales, that's okay. But know what's important to you. What are the factors that matter to you? And you want to stay true to that. So first of all, find the employers that are aligned to your visions, your value and needs. If you're in an interview and all sorts of red flags are going up because you don't feel like, that you've got some kids and you want to make sure you're there to watch them grow up, and they're telling you this is going to be a 90-hour-a-week type of job and you're never going to get home and we sleep on cots in the office, listen to yourself, because clearly that's not aligned with where you want to be. Also, look for the signs that an employer is indeed committed to engagement. We talked about this. Ask about it. Try to understand what it is that shows. Also, be where you belong. If the company is a fast, hard driving culture and you're more of a collaborative, take things at its own pace kind of guy, it's probably not going to be the good fit. Make sure that you know where you're going. Also, participate actively in your talent management. And there's several ways to do this. If you want to be more engaged, one of the things that can certainly help you is participating in an individual development plan. Now, for those of you who haven't heard that term, that refers to, at certain companies, if you're motivated and you have career development aspirations, what you'll be doing is documenting what your goals are professionally, what your goals are personally, what you'd like to learn. And often what it does is it signals to your manager that you want to be more engaged. So they may give you more opportunities to pursue some of these. Also, it shows that you're a professional who wants to be more motivated, but it also gives you skin in the game rather than just working rudderless on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to do my job. At least you have something to look forward to. And also, this is one thing I want to mention, is from companies that I've been at, the ones that do individual development plans, the employees that participate in that, and it tends to be voluntary, the ones that participate in that tend to be looked at much more closely for growth opportunities. So something to keep in mind. And also you want to position yourself for growth through your behaviors and processes, meaning respect the talent management process. If you've got reviews, do those. If you get feedback, take that feedback, try to understand where it comes from. Try to understand that if you're exhibiting a behavior that doesn't contribute to an engaged and positive culture, that maybe there's things internally that you need to look at, maybe not, but maybe it also sends the signal that you're a fit or not a fit, culture-wise and engagement-wise within that company. And then provide honest input during the engagement surveys. What happens is that when people fill these surveys out, typically it'll start to ask you questions about, what's the department that you work in, what function do you have, and companies try to generally parse it in such a way that it's not going to be readily identifiable who gave the feedback. I'm not saying that's a guarantee, so you've got to proceed accordingly. But one thing I will tell you is that if a company cares enough to do engagement surveys, the feedback will be consolidated up at the highest levels and then trickled down to influence change. So if you're providing, for lack of a better term, BS answers to engagement surveys, yeah, everything's great and I'm happy here, when you're really miserable and you don't think that what you're doing matters, then nobody's going to change anything because they're not hearing the feedback. So it's important to try to be as honest as you can on there. Also, understand that your actions do have consequences. And I know this is painful and I know this is a horrible thing, but the concept of work-life balance has become much more of a rarity in recent years. And you're hearing about the quiet quitting, people that are, I'm not a fan of this term, by the way, the idea of quiet quitting, where people are setting boundaries in terms of what they do at work. For those of you who haven't heard that term, quiet quitting really does refer about, there's different levels of this. There's people that have been retired on the job, folks that just show up and collect a paycheck. But there's also people that have been high performers and they just said, enough, I'm not getting rewarded for working 60 hours a week, so I'm going to scale it back to what's in my job description. But you do need to understand that your performance is going to be evaluated at the highest levels, whether it's work-life balance, quiet quitting, asking to work remotely when it's not something that other people in the department. So you need to be aware of that. It is a two-way street. So it's important to then be a voice for positive change, meaning that often what will happen is that if companies do care about engagement, they will often designate what's called an engagement champion within a department. So they might say, hey, Scott, in marketing, we want you to be the one that drives this process. And you can go ahead and you can be a champion for this. You can provide leadership, even if you're a line employee on terms of engagement, being a voice for this. Also, there's affinity groups. So some larger organizations will have, for example, an African-American group. They'll have an Asian employees group. They'll have an LGBTQ group. They might have other groups, international employees, where you have a chance to come in and influence some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion agendas from a corporate level. And if everybody in that group is more aligned, it's going to push that messaging up a little more effectively. You do need to recognize a company's limits. If there are, if you've got a company and it's small and they're having issues and, they need to get people in the office and there's things that, they need done, everybody has their limitations. There's certain customer expectations, whether it's inherent to the job or it's the company business model. You need to understand where those limits sit and where they can be flexible. But there's an expression that I had an old boss who told me years ago. He said, you can't fight City Hall, right? There's just certain entities that are powerful enough that inertia will just not change. So you need to understand what are the limits, what can you push and what can you not push. So while persistence matters, sometimes leaving a company is the best option. You might find that I've pushed again and again to get some more work-life balance, but they're not going to hire additional employees. They're not going to give me any additional resources for your own engagement and your own mental health and well-being. Maybe it's best to look outside or look within another department in the company. You can't reasonably expect a company to change their business model to accommodate one person. You can't. That's not, by the way, to be mistaken with certain accommodations that fall under, federal law or other guidelines, things that are required, for disabilities or things like that. But if you're looking because you want, you're just simply not satisfied or not feeling engaged, getting them to change direction can be very challenging. So some final thoughts. And by the way, if you have questions, this is a great time to put them into the Q&A. Love to answer them. So first of all, remember that workplace trends operate on a pendulum, meaning the trend that's popular today will often swing in a different direction and not be so popular. The example that I'm going to give is, there's one thing called top grading. I don't know if everybody's heard of this. This is where employees get ranked and rated. It was a system that was started by GE, or at least popularized by GE in the late 90s, early 2000s. And, it was a forced ranking. Everybody goes into a bell curve. And it's one of those things that have fallen out of favor. Doesn't mean it's not going to fall back into favor, but you might see it happening. And one of those things, for example, right now is virtual work. We saw that happen during COVID. It was a necessity. We see some companies that are pushing to try to maintain some sort of blended or full virtualization. I've actually got some clients who work in companies that don't even have a headquarters, but I've also seen other companies that are very clear. They're like, we want people back in the office. If you don't come back, you're not going to have a job. So you need to be mindful of that. You need to understand which way the winds are blowing. Also, maintain awareness of your current bargaining position in today's market. It may or it may not last. And I have a typo there. Sorry about that. But the idea being that, right now we're in a perceived labor shortage. Here we are, companies have got more and more jobs that are open. We don't have enough people to fill the jobs. People are not taking positions. So that's great if you want to really kind of play the market and, push for what you want while you're interviewing for a job. But, I've seen this happen enough time when the economy goes south and jobs start to dry up, that companies will start, squeezing the vice a little bit more. And, processes like, for example, putting people through more and more interviews and, pushing people harder to produce more on less and laying off. So just be aware of that. That is a trend. Managers, if you are leading people, you need to understand what disengagement looks like. What does an engaged and happy employee look like? But if you're seeing somebody who's disengaged, and you manage this person, you need to get involved. You need to roll up your sleeves, talk to the person, try to understand what's driving them, motivating them. Because in the end, if they're disengaged, they're probably not going to reflect well, or they may not stick around. You need to get yourself engaged, and it's not the company's job to make sure you're completely satisfied. In the end, you do own this. Your personal approach to this is a very important piece. So make sure that you do own that. Don't look away from values. I once during my career took a job with a company that it was very apparent on day one when I walked into the door that my values were not aligned with the organization. And I didn't stick around very long. So, I knew that I was not going to be the most productive. I knew it wasn't going to be the best fit. So, listen to yourself, listen to what your values are, and make sure that you're aligned with the company. Be a part of the solution. If people aren't engaged, are there ways that you can improve engagement? Are there suggestions that you have? Are there projects that you can lead to help change things? If you're managing people, is it your management style? Can you change the way that you manage people? Is part of it messaging? Try to think about that. And then, of course, last but not least, some companies will always be a dumpster fire. There's no getting away with that from that. So just keep in mind, there are places that are always going to be terrible places to work. No matter what they try to do, no matter how much lipstick they try to put on that pig, it's going to be a rotten place to work. So know who those are. It's really honestly not going to take that much research online to figure out who they are. So that concludes this. I'd like to open this up to any questions. Jeff, turn it over to you.
Great job, Scott. I love any webinar that involves an image of a dumpster fire, so thank you for that. Sarah's got a great question that I'm going to get to, but one comment I wanted to make while we invite folks to go ahead again and chime in with your questions. Now's a great time to take advantage of Scott's knowledge here. It was interesting as you were going through your presentation, Scott, so much of finding a good situation requires that people are doing their homework in advance, the conversations that happen during an interview. And you mentioned just doing some research online. I'm at a place in an age where I tend to not believe anything I see on the internet. And so I wanted to drill down. You mentioned, lists of the best companies to work for. What are the ones that you think are the most trusted that people should seek out first? I think I heard you mention Forbes. Were there some other lists that you would say, like, yes, those have been vetted and are not just, paid ads by companies?
Forbes and Fortune tend to publish a lot of very good ones. What's important about that is that they're nationally focused companies. They tend to focus on national surveys, and these are companies that tend to generally invest that. But I also think that, like, I'll give an example. Every region tends to have their own, right? So, for example, in Florida, we've got a magazine called Florida Trend. Florida Trend ranks the best companies in the state, and I trust it deeply because they know the local business environment, they know who the companies are. You'll also see a lot of chambers of commerce will go ahead and recognize these companies. But like, I'll give an example here in South Florida. We have Baptist Health, which is a medical system down here in South Florida. They're a nonprofit that behaves like a corporate company. They do very well, and they appear on every single list. They're everywhere. Florida Trends, the local newspapers, they're constantly showing up in magazine articles and newspaper articles about that. So I think, even if, I would encourage, if you're going ahead and you're looking and it's a list and it looks like there was some methodology behind it, and they'll generally explain what the methodology was behind it. You can Google best companies, but just know there is a ton of effort that goes into getting onto these lists, and companies need to at least take it seriously to do so. So I wouldn't put necessarily that, the fact that they're on a best list company mean that it's going to be the greatest place on earth to work for. There's a flip side to this, which means that they're also investing essentially a lot of money in marketing. So, and that's what it is. It's employee branding. But, just know that if a company shows up on best company lists repeatedly or across different lists, it's a very good sign.
Jessica, I see your question in the chat. We'll definitely get to that, but I mentioned Sarah's question. And Scott, I think you talked about some of this stuff very much so at the end of your presentation. But can you comment a little bit more about the folks at the lower end of the leadership spectrum, the lower to mid-level managers, folks who might feel like they lack decision-making power? What are the specific things that somebody can do in an organization to have an impact on engagement of not just their direct reports, but their broader team, their broader office? I know you talked about getting involved with some of those like employee resource groups around affinities, just being a voice for positive change. But, and Sarah, I'm curious also to know if you work at sort of a large company or a small company, because I think that always has a huge impact too. But Scott, can you drill down again on what those things are that Sarah could do to try to have an impact on a broader swath of people?
Absolutely. And Sarah, this is an amazing question. Thank you for this. I think that, it's important for people who are at a certain level to know what they can and cannot do, right? That as a low to mid-level manager, you're not going to have the ability to change the company direction. But the one piece that you do have is the ability to really cultivate a strong, trusting relationship with your employees. And that's the most important thing. I look back to the best manager I ever had. She was an individual I worked with at a Fortune 500 company. And what really stuck out about her was, several things. Number one was she understood what the corporate objectives were and was able to translate those for me in my job. Hey, here's what we need as a company. Here's what you need to watch out for. Here's why this matters, rather than just repeating what's going on. Secondly, she championed me. she understood what my career aspirations were. She asked, I told her what they were, and we worked on some development plans and to understand that. And, she provided me some opportunities to try, and this is something I suggest, which is giving people some cross-functional opportunities. Maybe there's project teams that are going to give additional exposure, different initiatives and different stretch assignments. But I think the other thing that you can absolutely do as a manager is give honest, raw, unfiltered feedback. If your employee is not performing up to snuff, tell them where they're falling short, help them understand why it's an issue, and then work with them on a plan to get them back on track. I think that's probably the most important thing that they can do. And then I think the last thing is, I always, view best managers, and this is an analogy I've used in the past. I compare great managers to Batman. They kind of swoop in, they support people from behind the scenes, they work in the shadows so that their people are going to get the spotlight and they're not going to get as much of it. So, that's really kind of the gist. I think if you can kind of operate like Batman, I think that's kind of, with a lot less beating people up. But I think that's, I think that's probably the ways I would recommend.
Less beating people up, more lifting other people up.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Jessica has asked, you spoke during, let me also just say, Sarah clarified, she works at a pretty large company, but with a small team. So Sarah, thanks for that context. Jessica's asking, you spoke during the interview process, having the EQ, the emotional intelligence to understand engagement and culture. Jessica is asking if you have tips on understanding leadership accountability, both top down and peer to peer. I mean, those relationships, I had made a note to myself about, sometimes like the organization can really be working on engagement, but those interpersonal conflicts at work can really have a bigger impact on your engagement. So how does somebody sort of understand the accountability of leadership in this and accountability to peers sort of horizontally?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Jessica. These are really good questions. I think this is where you have to lean a little bit on your leadership team to understand more of this. People that are higher up, it's funny, people think that management is just a wonderful thing, being a manager. And, I've managed people and it's kind of a miserable thing in a lot of ways too. I mean, yeah, you get paid more money and you've got more visibility, but you're also in the crossfire a lot more. And you see a lot more, for lack of a better expression, the sausage being made. So, I think if you want to truly understand that, I think the first thing you do is you talk to your manager and ask, hey, listen, I'm seeing this from the from the executive leadership team. Can you help me understand what's the relationship between this individual, how this plays into what's going on within the company? Can you help me understand, what's going on here? So like, for example, you might be working at a Fortune 500 company and you may not see a connection between what happens in marketing and sales, but I assure you that the people who are higher level can understand what's the relationship between, say, the chief marketing officer and the chief of revenue. So, asking for that visibility, asking for updates, I think part of it is, and I'm assuming, by the way, that you're already within the company. That's the assumption I'm making on this. I think, when you have regular conversations with your manager, I think part of it is also drawing a, clear line of what, need to know. In other words, hey, I'm running into a little bit of friction here dealing with, this VP, and I'm seeing something happening here. Can you help me provide some clarification in terms of what's a better way to effectively navigate this executive leadership? So I think asking for some guidance on that can be helpful.
Well, Scott, the very best emails I get in my inbox are the ones I get from you when you say, hey, I just recently wrote an article about this and I'm thinking about doing it as a presentation. What are your thoughts? I just go ahead and smash the yes button on my keyboard. You've done so many of these fantastic presentations for the BU community over the years. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you and what you've done for BU. So thank you for this. And I always want people to follow up with you. How do you want people to go about doing that if they've got questions they want to take offline or learn more about some of the services that you provide for folks around their professional brand?
Absolutely. Yeah. Feel free to reach out to me. Here's my contact information. right here on the slide. I want to thank you, Jeff, and I want to thank everybody for attending and for your wonderful questions. If you have any other, questions and you'd like to talk about this, let me know. And I really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to partnering with you again.
Oh, it'll be my pleasure. I do want to make one quick plug. If you haven't, folks on the other end, I'm not speaking to Scott because I know he's on there already. If you haven't joined BU Connects, you see this over my head here. So much about what Scott talked about today was doing research about companies before you find yourself working there during the interview process, et cetera. And BU Connects is a great place to do that. I mean, we've got, over 18,000 members of this community working at thousands and thousands of companies around the world. About 13,000 people have raised their hand and said that they're willing to help others. And so just by searching through the directory, if you've got a company that you're looking at, that's a great place to go and check which alumni, which students might have internships at these companies, and reach out to them to find out more about the culture and the engagement of their employees. So definitely do that. I also just want to thank all of you for being here today. Specifically want to thank those of you like Scott who are supporting the university with your donations. We really appreciate your support and wouldn't be able to do your work without it. So much of what you talked about, Scott, today blends into management and leadership. And I want to invite everybody to attend our next webinar coming up on Wednesday, November 16th. We're going to be offering improvisation, a key skill for the 21st century leader. We've got a really interesting alum who's doing a lot about blending the principles of improv comedy to be a more effective leader. I'm really excited for that one, and I hope you'll all join us. You can sign up for that now on our website at bu.edu/alumni. And so that's it. Thank you again, Scott. This was another fantastic presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Have a great day or a great evening, wherever you might be.
All right.